this is Malcolm and Simone here, and we are happy to be talking about some pronatalist statistics and policy today. Today's episode is going to be focused on France's recent policy proposals to combat demographic collapse. However, I have not seen them. So Simone is going to be presenting them to me, and you are going to be getting my in real time reaction.
Would you like to know more?
Yeah, so I recently came across this Telegraph article. It was published, I think, a little earlier this month, but it's about policies that have been discussed for a while. It's called France to Offer Young People Fertility Checks to Combat Falling Fertility Rates. And it discusses a couple of policies, which at best, not going to do anything, at worst, are probably going to cause damage, at least unless I'm crazy. I want your take on this. So the gist is that France's President Emmanuel Macron is laudable for recognizing demographic collapse as an issue and talking about it. France's fertility rate relative to the rest of the EU is actually pretty good.
But it had a massive collapse this last year.
It
so
did, but
7% year over year.
They're still above the EU average. They're still above the UK. They're still above Germany, and they're still above Spain. So, like, generally speaking, France is the one that looks good, maybe because it's a little more Catholic. Who knows? There's a lot.
No, it's because it's less Catholic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you contrast it with other countries, it's actually more secular. And again, this is what we've seen across a lot of things, is that the more Catholic a country is in Europe, the lower its fertility rate, with the average Catholic majority country in Europe having a fertility rate of only 1.3.
Yeah, that makes sense then. But anyway, they still recognize it's a problem. I really appreciate that. So they get points for that. All right, petty points for that. But the latest thing that Emmanuel Macron, France's president, has proposed is fertility checks for young people. He's trying to get people to test their fertility earlier, but quite honestly, doing so isn't going to boost fertility.
That sounds like an interesting idea.
Well, from the article, I'll read what they say. Emmanuel Macron is to offer fertility checks to all 18 to 25-year-olds as part of a grand plan to combat declining fertility rates. The French president first announced his ambition to enact French demographic rearmament, which that's fun. That's a fun term. At a press conference on January 16th as part of a wide array of measures aimed at reviving his stuttering second term. I don't think that's going to help, and I can tell you why, but I want to hear why you think that's interesting and worth trying.
So what age ranges?
18 to 25.
Why wouldn't this? It's a great idea, actually. So it's very similar to me to the policy where conservatives, to fight abortion, they made it so that women had to look at a picture of their ultrasound before getting an abortion, which dramatically lowers the chance of abortion. They are creating a policy which is encouraging people to recognize their short fertility windows, which is one of the core issues in society today in terms of falling fertility rates, is men do not realize they have fertility windows. They think that because some men occasionally have kids when they're older, that it is normal for the male fertility window to extend well past 40, and it just is not. You might occasionally get that, but you're going to have a really high rates of diseases and stuff like that, and you're going to have, it's just not great. So that's one huge thing that hopefully it can help clear up that myth and force people to understand that myth.
And what Macron recognizes and mentioned in a magazine interview is, quote, every woman should have free access to her body. But one figure stands out for me. The fertility rate is 1.8 and the rate of desire for a child is 2.3. Now that's a good point, right? So there are women in France who want to, on average, have more kids than they have. And so he recognizes that people are having fertility problems or that they're not starting when they should. And maybe one thing he can enact to change that is to inform them about their fertility. Again, here's why.
No, it's not informing them about their fertility. You're reading what's happening wrong.
Okay.
Is forcing them to take a reality check on their fertility window through the most realistic mechanism available to them.
Right, through just hard data.
Women often don't realize how short their fertility window is.
Yeah.
After 35, if a woman gets pregnant, that's considered a geriatric pregnancy. that is considered an extremely old age pregnancy and likely to lead to complications. A lot of women don't know the window is 35. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe by the time I'm 40 and I'll start thinking about it in my mid 30s. No, if you start thinking about it in your mid 30s, you are not going to have many kids. You've already lost. You need to be getting married and starting having kids in your late 20s, not mid 30s. Okay, so that's another thing.
But again, here's why I don't think it's going to work.
Okay.
As much as everyone's, we just should inform people. We just need to let them know that their fertility window is short. I don't honestly think that the problem is that people are being unrealistic about their short fertility windows. I think that many people who want to have kids are aware. So basically, the people who already want to have kids
You're
and
just
plan on having kids know
wrong.
that their fertility window is short, and they're struggling to find partners, and they're struggling to get their careers in orders, and they're still going to wait to have kids because they
Oh, you
feel
have
like
literally seen this even among fans of this show when we've talked to them. Is males who are under the illusion that their fertility, they're going to be like able to have kids.
it's
well
one
after
factor.
30.
I don't think it's the factor. I think it's one factor, but definitely not the defining factor.
It's just, no, it's not the defining factor, but it is an inexpensive. Like if I was going to put the weight anywhere, policy wise, this is one of the easiest areas to do this outside of changing education. Here's the problem with changing education. You could try to do better education around people's fertility windows. It's just that if you put that into schools or colleges, it is going to be administered by bureaucrats who are usually anti-natalists because they're
Right.
usually far left leaning, or at least anti-French national natalists. And so I'm sorry, like it's actually a fairly good policy for the cost.
I hold it as neutral. I don't think it's going to help because I think that the really big factors are culture, that people just don't want to have kids or they don't feel like they're ready to have kids yet. And they're still going to ultimately start trying or feel like they're finally ready when it's too late. So,
Okay, what's the next one?
yeah. So the next thing that bothers me is, okay, I'm going to read from the article again. Mr. Macron also outlined his future birth leave scheme, which will, quote, come to force at the end of 2025, unquote. The aim is to pay young parents who stop working or reduce their working hours to look after their offspring. Quote, 3 months for mothers, 3 months for fathers, cumulative during the child's first year and compensated at 50% of salary up to the Social Security ceiling, which is 1,900 euros, unquote, he said. Now, again, I really think that this is damaging. Things that are like, we'll just pay you to put your career on hold. This is many places that have very permissive maternity leave policies are still seeing their birth rates plummet because women are realistic and they understand that basically you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If there's no maternity leave, it's hard to have kids. And if there is maternity leave, you can have kids and you can get support, but there are going to then be more glass ceilings in your career because people know that you're more of a liability. And there are also going to be major career costs because you're just going to disappear for a while. And that's going to put your career on hold, no matter what the nation may try to do to protect you.
So to clarify, this is mandatory maternity leave.
It's not mandatory. It's just basically ensuring that women are compensated. Both women and men are compensated when taking parental leave.
And does it compensate both genders equally?
Yes.
And it's something like 80% of their salary, right, for the year?
At 50% of salary. And
Yeah.
it's just for 3 months.
Okay. It's
3 months for mothers, 3 months for fathers. So it's a total of 6 months. Like the father can take 3 months off, the mother can take 3 months off. So it's basically saying you can take time off. The government will pay you half of your salary. So that should make it easier for you. Again, I don't think that's going to make a difference.
It's going to increase gender pay gap. I mean, anything around maternity leave as a concept, we're just against. You need to build cultural practices around having children at work.
This is gender neutral. So men can do it too. It's just, I don't think men are going to do it.
No, but it's much more important to create laws that like you cannot have a woman not come to work with her newborn. That needs to just be a legal mandate, something that is normal for women to be wearing their children all the time.
Yeah. If we could just change the norms to bring your baby to the office, will help to provide some support or at least have an inclusive environment where it's cool to do that.
And then you want to really help things would be an interesting policy take.
Oh.
Bring your baby to the office. 50% of your salary gets paid as a bonus to the company for every mother during her first few months.
Like the company gets a subsidy for having a slightly less productive and more disruptive mother, but like for supporting her.
So now the company is
Yeah.
financially incentivized for its employees to get
Oh,
pregnant
that's
instead
good.
of
I like that.
disincentivized for its employees getting pregnant.
I like that.
And you create many downstream positive practices from that outside of maternity leave, which I think builds up this false fear of having the kid is such a burden, everything like that. And then people can spiral around that. When historically women worked and had kids at the same time, you have with all of our kids. I just don't like that expectation, but I wouldn't say it's a disastrous plan. I
No,
just
again,
think
that's neutral. There are two things that I think are quite negative. So let's get to the first one, which is a very easy one to hate, which is that he is strongly against surrogacy. He says that it is, quote, not compatible with the dignity of women. It is a form of commodification of their bodies, unquote, he argued. Which is just, it's very annoying because on the other hand, he's argued that he doesn't want pronatalism in France to be about shaming or guilting people who don't want to have kids into having kids. He's very much about supporting those who want to have kids. And this is one of the top ways. Surrogacy is one of the top ways you can support people who want to have kids but can't. I feel like getting over surrogacy is one of the most important things when it comes to encouraging a nation to be able to have more kids. It's even a great way for people who don't want to have kids of their own to contribute to a nation's pronatalism while also making money. Because a lot of people don't mind commodifying their bodies, which is shown by the rate of women who are on OnlyFans now. Hello, like...
Yes, so you have something like OnlyFans legal, where women are literally, and to my understanding, OnlyFans is illegal in France, and pornography is legal in France, which means he's literally okay with women literally commodifying their bodies for base level human debasement, right?
And actually for probably more antinatalist tendencies, right? Because men are using OnlyFans as a Band-Aid in place
but creating a human life that another family is going to love and raise and take care of, and that is, just the perversion of that sentiment. I think it's really just that he doesn't want to do something like he's trying to appease the conservatives who are...
It's not working. His approval ratings are dropping. He's not doing well at all. I don't know. Just it really, that bothers me. But here's the really stupid thing. And I think it's stupid. I want to get your take on this because of what you've said regarding child support required by men and its effect on fertility. So here is a very interesting, and I've not heard any other leader establish this as a pronatalist policy, but I think that if he does really push for this, it's going to backfire like crazy. And this is very novel. So get this. I'm reading the article again. Mr. Macron also outlined his future birth leave scheme, which will... Oh, okay, so I'm quoting from the article again. Mm-hmm. In a video broadcast by Elle, the magazine, Mr. Macron, who has no children, although his wife, Brigitte, has 3 from her first marriage, also suggested opening a debate on the introduction of a possible duty to visit for fathers in single-parent families where women are the main carers. Quote, "We've allowed men to exonerate themselves from all parental duties," he said, while pointing out that 90% of youths involved in riots in France last July, quote, "came from either child welfare or single-parent families." Mr. Macron added, "When there is a father, he must exercise all his duties, and the mother, when she is in that situation, must be able to demand regular visits." He said fathers should, for example, take part in parent-teacher meetings and be a, quote, "stakeholder," unquote, in the child's education. The president stressed, "It is a duty to be a parent, and it's a duty that doesn't end with a divorce or separation," and said parents must, quote, "both exercise their responsibilities," unquote. He added, "Even for the child, it is better. A child who never sees his father is a child who feels abandoned," unquote, and whose, quote, "emotional and educational development is not the same," unquote. Now, I agree. Children do better with 2 parents. Totally. But
actually, I don't think the evidence is as strong for that as people like to say it is. I'll give you the full stats here that people... Hold on. So if you're looking gender blind, children do better with 2 parents.
Oh, but when you look at single father households,
households, they do about the same they do in 2-parent households. So what's unique about single father households, right? It's that most single father households are not single father households because a relationship failed. So let me explain what I mean by that, because people may not be familiar with the court system. The court system hugely is favorable to women. Women can usually get the kids if they want. So what that means is if you have a single father household, it's usually because the wife died. And
Life
so,
is wildly incompetent and evil and messed up.
yeah, and in that case, a divorce was warranted, so it's
Totally.
not a
The kids
sign
are
that
better off in that
the
case.
dad,
Yeah.
yeah, messed up. So I don't take that as a condemnation of women as single parents. I just think what it shows is that a lot of these single parent women are people who are fundamentally unfit to be parents or be in a long-term relationship with another human.
And the
Um,
lesser evil. Like the husbands too are probably unfit, but whatever.
No, I wouldn't say necessarily. I think if you created more equitable divorce laws and
No.
more equitable laws around child custody, that would have a better impact in terms of getting more fathers involved in their children's lives than forcing. But think about what you're forcing here. So, one, you're forcing a father into a kid's life who, not like he's forcing the fathers to care about the kids. He's forcing fathers who don't care about the kids into kids' lives.
Mhm.
That is not, there is no evidence that is a helpful thing to do, or that's going to fix some sort of emotional problems the kid have around being abandoned, that the kids only had their father around because he was legally obligated to be around.
Yeah.
um
I feel like
that
it also adds baggage. It's just another one of those liability things that affects the male subconscious in deciding whether it, at all to engage with women. So along with all these other laws around consent and post hoc deciding that someone didn't consent to some kind of liaison with a man, this is just another one of those things that I think men would think about. Oh, and then the government's going to, for my entire life, not only demand child support, but also demand that I travel across the entire country just to show up at parent teacher conferences if I move. Like, this is going to ruin my life even more than I thought it ever would. So I'm just going to get a vasectomy right now and never ever have kids, that kind of thing. That's what I worry about.
No, it's obviously what's going to happen. I see almost no positive outcome for this other than that it may give some men more leverage in getting access to their children.
Yeah,
um,
that could be a good thing, but that's,
um
I think that they were probably, this seemed like the kind of law that would have some exception clause where if the woman really hated the man or something, that like she would still be able to cut him out somehow, you
Yeah, so it
know?
seems like it's just giving the wives more control when you would achieve much more by creating more equitable divorces and getting kids to fathers more
Mhm.
when the father is competent. And I also think that this again goes to, I think, the myth of the two-parent household. When you look at the data, like the data I'm talking about, I just think it shows that actually what you're seeing is the type of person who cannot maintain a stable relationship is the type of person who is a bad parent. And at that point, it's, oh, yeah, no, duh. Like anyone should know that. And they have the type of kid who causes more social damage and more social harm.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that actually is a pretty chilling statistic about the riots and stuff like
Right?
that.
Yeah, that's, and
But
how do you even get that information? I don't, are they polling everyone who shows up to a riot? They're breaking a window and they're like, "Sir, did you have a single parent family?"
I suspect that if you were to look into this data more,
Mhm.
is covering up something that is, what's the word I'm looking for here? Inconvenient truth that the dominant cultural group doesn't want to admit, that the urban monoculture doesn't want to admit, which is that most of the rioters were from an ethnic or cultural group that has very
Oh,
low rates of fathers staying around.
oh, I can see that, I
That
guess.
is, I think, what he is actually stating there.
Ooh.
Not that they're just broadly. So I think that's important to note is
Yeah.
cultural groups which do not encourage fathers, I think have worse outcomes than cultural groups that do encourage fathers more broadly, because they're just, you've got to look at all the things that then gets elevated within those cultural groups. If a person isn't rewarded for staying around their kids, they're often not rewarded as much for treating women well. And you're much more likely to get really high power distance between husband and wife, which leads to abusive situations for the wife, even when the husband does stay around. You're
Yeah.
also likely to have wives really heavily optimizing around just base masculinity instead
Mm.
of, is this person going to be a good caregiver? Because they are not searching for, biologically speaking, they are not searching for a long-term partner. They're searching for genes. And so when women are doing that, cultural groups often end up elevating within them traits that are like wealth, physical strengths, risk-taking behavior, i.e. crime,
Right.
and a lot of just generally negative traits become high status within those cultural groups.
Mhm.
And this is definitely something that needs to be fixed. I just don't see this as fixing it. I think with a lot of this, it's something that comes from within the cultural group. Fixing it comes from within the cultural groups
Yeah.
and members within the cultural groups which choose a different pathway. But they're
And
always
empowering those cultural groups to fix their own ways is pretty
yeah,
meaningful.
which involves less school overreach, school cultural overreach and stuff like that. Because the urban monoculture is interested in no kids. Like they don't want any kids at all. It's just do whatever you feel like, whenever you feel like it.
But that's again why I don't think this practice of informing people of their fertility window is really going to make that much of a difference. Because listen, if I was informed of my fertility window in between the age of 18 and 25, which is, I met you at age 24, I'd be like, great. Yep. I never want to have kids, so this doesn't matter. I'm not going to get it
Well, I
tested.
think it's something that comes at a certain point in your life. I think a more fun way to do this or something is all women when they graduate school and all men get a clock that's counting down their fertility window, and they get to put it in their house wherever they
Their
want,
biological clock.
not thinking about it. Here's the thing. Many progressives as a joke would display this because they'd be like,
Oh,
oh, but it would still remind all of their
it's
guests
still
and them
TikTok,
every day.
TikTok,
Because
TikTok.
there's that moment in your life where your fertility window goes from being a joke to an existential crisis. And being reminded of it, I think, makes that day happen earlier.
I don't know. Just when I think of progressive Simone, nah,
You
not
wouldn't
at
care.
all. Really, not at all. Not at all. And that's the thing is, again, like I can model this so well because I was this. And the only thing for me that changed my interest in fertility was meeting you, was finding
Meeting a
someone who
guy
was
who
so
you
perfect as
respected, that
you.
was it.
And if Macron invested in dating, in relationship formation, in creating a culture that elevates the family, I feel like that would make so much more of a difference than telling people about their fertility window. You know what I mean? It just people don't
That
give a
seems to be
shit
the best of the
about their
policies that
fertility
he
until he
has. I
did.
will say that the policies are honestly bizarre that he thinks this would have a positive impact. It appears almost more like subsidies or trying to, what's the word I'm looking for, placate special interest groups or within society than actually trying to come up with a real
With the real
solution to
solution.
fertility collapse.
And even I don't know if you saw in South Korea, they're considering giving a approximately $52,000 subsidy to parents for each kid,
Wow.
which is that's unprecedented. And this is along the lines of what Robin Hanson has suggested in terms of upfront payments, right? Even that, though, when it comes to culture in Korea being what it is, and the amount of helplessness plus the animosity between men and women, I
Mhm.
don't think is going to solve the problem. It's no one's listening to people when they're saying what's wrong. No one's listening to women saying, this isn't working for me. No one's listening to men when they're like, I can't find a woman like this. Everyone's talking about
Yeah,
the
but it's a joke.
problem.
When a man says, "I can't find a woman," they're like, "Then you must be an incel." And when women are like, "The
Yeah,
gender dynamics in this country are,
are toxic.
are toxic," they're like, "You must be a toxic feminist," right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's because people like to elevate the extremists within both of those movements
Mhm.
instead of point out that both groups do have genuine grievances.
They do.
The thing is, I just don't care because all of this can be fixed with culture, with
Yes, but why are
voluntary
policymakers not
chosen
doing that?
culture.
It's
Um,
so obvious that culture's the answer for to
because
us.
what I guess what I'm saying here is you're not getting incel ultra orthodox Jews. You might have some fertility problems with this community. You're not getting incel Amish men. Okay, you might on the fringes, but not more than you would historically, really. And I think that, and you're not getting people within these communities being like, "Oh, so toxic to masculinity or whatever. They may leave the movement and then complain about that because now they're in a completely different cultural subset where the urban monoculture really likes to elevate people's beef with their birth culture because that's how it prevents them from reconverting. Cults always do this. So it tries to convince them that they hate their parents and their parents were abusive and their birth culture was abusive. So it will reward them for going on rants about that. So yeah, when they leave the group, but when they're in the group, you're really not going to get as much complaining because it functionally works. And I think that this is, it's bizarre that he's doing this. It's weird, like token, I'm going to try to do something about this, but not really. It's sad to see, but it's something that we've predicted that as people recognize fertility collapse is a real issue, they will use it to push forward agendas that they had beforehand that are largely unconnected.
And do you think it could be, the article did mention conspicuously that he is childless, if you consider biologically speaking his choices in life. Do you think maybe also the problem is largely that the policymakers and the people who are attempting supposedly to address demographic collapse are largely childless themselves or parents of just one or two children, so not really pronatalist themselves and not really aware of what makes people have a lot of kids or the mindset of someone who has a lot of kids?
Yeah, I think it's more of a thing that a person who's childless was able to become a French prime minister. In the US, historically, it would have been incredibly hard to be elected president if you didn't have any kids.
No, weren't there a bunch of childless presidents?
I don't think there were that many. It was seen as a very weird or low status thing. I'll look it up and add it afterwards. Yep. Only 5 US presidents have had no kids. So around 10%. But
Thanks.
yeah, I think that we looked upon historically childless people with a lot of cultural suspicion. And in many countries, like in Israel, where the fertility rate is still high, they're still looked upon with a level of suspicion because it's seen as fundamentally like a sign of a perversion of their personal value system, that they valued cashing in all of the chips that previous generations had paid forwards for personal worldly things, whether it's speed at their career or whatever. Like they paid forward the intergenerational sacrifice that every single one of their ancestors has made. And
well, I would also say that like having kids historically has been normative. So being childless would make you slightly different or whatever.
Yeah. So while I am okay, like I say that we fight for a future where people are allowed to have no kids, I do. But I do not fight for a future where people are able to reach the highest levels of society if they didn't even attempt to have kids. I don't think
citizenship is earned through childbearing.
We created a model of government that we should probably go over in one of our episodes. But yeah, one of the ways that like one of your votes is based off of how many kids you have.
How many people you contribute to the nation.
Yeah, and there's different ways you can do that than just having kids, but we don't want to go into all of that. But the point being is that I think that's a totally reasonable thing, that you shouldn't be able to vote if you don't have kids. If you don't have a vested stake in the future of your country, why are you voting?
But I do think this is a
for yourself, for
conspicuous
this generation.
This may be a conspicuous issue behind the systematic failure and very consistent failure of governments to successfully implement pronatalist policy, which could be along the lines of Tracy Woodgrain's article, Substack article, Republicans Are Doomed, in which he talks about the bureaucratic, legal, legislative, political ruling class that essentially gets shit done in government is largely progressive and therefore lives progressive lifestyles. That is to say, low fertility lifestyles, and doesn't really get pronatalism, and therefore really can't model or address demographic collapse and pronatalism because they are too ingrained within the problem.
I think you need affirmative action for parents, basically, or even just policies where you say you can't go above certain ranks within the government bureaucracy if you don't have over X many kids. And I think that this is where China is going right now. And I think it's one of their more positive policies. What I'm more scared of is they move to forced insemination, which I think is also likely. But barring government positions for people with under certain fertility, I think it's absolutely where they're going. And historically, this was done by default in many societies, just because people with that many kids were seen as deviants, which functionally, if you're doing that by choice, you are to an extent. You are expecting other people to have kids to support you in your old age. You
Yeah.
are putting the work onto us, for us putting the effort in to raise our kids in the hopes that our kids' taxes will one day go to support you when you're living off the state.
Yeah.
And that is a genuine perversion. And people can be like, no, I'm saving up enough money for when I'm older. And it's like, who do you think is caring for you? Who do you think is, you are still expecting and exploiting the labor of others. And I'm okay with you continuing to exist, but I don't think that people should be elevated for this. And I think we need a lot more shame in that direction. And this is something that people don't understand. Shame is not the same as not allowing someone to do something. And I am very okay with shame as a cultural tactic when an individual makes selfish life decisions which are not about the betterment of society or making the next generation better, but purely for their own career development or personal satisfaction or validation.
Yeah. Okay, so final question for you. When it comes to these nations and their, in my opinion, either neutral or actively harmful policies when it comes to pronatalism, do you think that most nations would be better off just not doing anything? Just stop. Just stop spending money on this. Stop trying. Just don't. Would you recommend that over them continuing to try stuff?
Yeah, almost right now they're just making things worse often.
Yeah, that's my thing. As I was telling her, I'm like, France is digging its own grave here. Like they were doing relatively better. I feel like they're just going to make things worse.
Maybe, until what they need is groups like ours advising them. And we've reached out to them. We reached out to the population division at the French government. We're like, oh, we can help you guys, but never heard back from them. And I think that's the thing.
Better than the UK. The UK was like, no thanks. You're fine. You're not fine, UK.
Yeah, you're not fine, guys. But yeah, I think what we need is organizations like our nonprofit doing more consulting with these governments. And I hope that as things get worse, they'll begin to go to organizations like ours that are interested in real solutions and not things that are just designed to appease special interest groups. That said, it's going to be very hard to do because in regards to pronatalism, because you're not really rewarded in any way for efficacious results, there isn't a huge motivation, politically speaking, for this type of delayed reward. It's not like the economy or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't expect it to actually happen.
Yeah. Oh, sorry for hiccups, McGee over here. I think she's getting better, but I love you though.
I love you too.
And at least individual families are going to figure this out, if not countries and nations. So it'll be okay.
Have a great day, Simone.
I love you. You too. You got the kids?